Hello, gorgeous, and welcome to the Women on Top podcast. I'm your host, Valerie Lynn, and with over 15 years of business experience, I became truly passionate about finding ways to support and hear from way more women. And what we know to be true is that women thrive when they are in their favorite position, on top in business, in relationships, in personal growth, and on top in being real and authentic to who the hell they are. So I invite you to sit back and enjoy the Women on Top podcast. Everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Women on Top. And today I'm beyond excited at this point. I have had the jitters because I'm so looking forward to this conversation. I have sitting here with me, Arianna Davis Santana, who is an executive editor at NBC's The Today Show. She also is formerly the founding digital director of OprahMag.com, where she really helped shape one of the most influential women's media platforms. And on top of that, she also is the author of What Would Frida Do? A Guide to Living Boldly, which really is a journey that kind of invites us to stop shrinking and start living fully. And I am just so grateful for the incredible leadership that she has brought. And we get to have her here on the show today. So Arianna, welcome. I'm so glad you're here.
Oh my gosh, what a fantastic intro. I feel like you should just introduce me every morning. That will give me a great ego boost.
Yeah, glad to have you here. You have had such an incredible career. So I just want to start with, what is kind of something that when you think about the woman that you were about 10 years ago, what are the things that she would kind of recognize in your story now? And what would she maybe be surprised about?
Wow, what a great question. I think the things that she would recognize is I think that then, just as now, I think really even though I think the course of my career went in directions that I probably never would have predicted, meaning leading a digital team and all these different things, I think the thing that has always remained the same is just this core love of storytelling and just loving um telling stories, crafting stories, sharing stories in whatever way it has kind of manifested in my career. I think that is the thing. I think 10 years ago, I would be like, oh yeah, of course. She's still, doing the thing when it comes to thinking about stories and, always having that passion and that love for storytelling. And then I think the thing that might surprise her is I think that maybe, 10 years ago, even 10 years ago, let's see, that was when I was working at Refinery 29. And so I really was getting my feet wet more and kind of really, I think, learning all things digital and all things, what makes the internet tick. I still don't know that I would have been able to predict that, eventually my full-time job would be leading a digital team entirely and that was, um, what was in the cards for me. So I think that media is always changing and it is kind of hard to predict. So I think media will always take you by surprise for sure.
Yeah, I think that's such a great kind of recap. And there's always those kind of through lines. I feel like when we look backwards and we see our story, and also those moments where we think, gosh, there's a couple of moments in there that I would not have thought that, here we are. That was not on my bingo card, but I'm kind of grateful for them. And so I wonder for you, because somebody like me can easily look at a story like yours and think, oh my gosh, she is the epitome of a woman on top. She has done it all. She's at the pinnacle of her career. I would love to know some of those moments along that journey where you maybe paused or even kind of thought to yourself, gosh, I don't know if I want to take the next step. I don't know if this is the right path for me.
Yeah, well, yes. I'm so glad you asked that because I think it's very easy, when you're summarizing a bio the way you just did, right? It's very easy to just be like, oh yeah, it sounds like everything's great and she's a woman on top. But it's not, you're not always on top, right? And that's just the reality. And I've had many of those moments. I mean, I still remember the very beginning of my career. I, was a recent Penn State grad. I had moved to New York. I was interning in newspapers, eventually got a post-grad internship at the Oprah Magazine. That was my first gig, right? And I was enamored. I was so excited to be there. It was Oprah. It was the magazine world. It was just the dream. And I remember this was 2009. So just to age myself for all of you guys, it was 2009. It was the recession times and it was a particularly very uncertain time in media. And I remember, I want to say like 2 weeks after I started my internship, I'm still super wide eyed. I'm like super happy to be there. The magazine had layoffs, and there was like, I remember, I used to help the editor in chief. And so I was like kind of sitting outside her office, and I just saw this like line of like, women and people who worked there who were just crying and sobbing and hugging each other, and colleagues saying goodbye to each other. And then there's like an article the next day, and these various media outlets talking about like the big layoffs that had just happened at Hearst Magazines. And I just remember being like, whoa, like this is like literally, the start of my career. I'm just starting out. And it just felt like maybe it was a sign that, like, was I really supposed to be here? Had I made a crazy choice? Maybe my dad was right and I shouldn't have like thought about journalism during a recession as like a stable full-time job. So just to like, make sure that people understand, that was like, at the beginning, right? So it was very much like okay, this is it was like a scary, challenging time. And I had a lot of people in my life who were like, are you sure about this journalism thing? And maybe you should think about this instead, or have you considered this? And so I definitely had many moments like that during my career. Another moment that comes to mind is um, I did start my career at Oprah Magazine, and it was the dream, and I loved it. And it was such an incredible experience. I always like to say that I feel like that magazine raised me. It was like, my
Mm,
20s, working for a place where it was all about living your best life. I was Gail King's assistant. It was just, an absolute dream. And then eventually, I think I was there for, I want to say almost 6 years before I was like, okay, I think it's time for me to spread my wings, try something new. And I left to work at Us Weekly because I have always been a pop culture entertainment girl. I love all things celebrity. And I was like, this feels like a great place to just like get my feet wet and really, immerse myself in that world. Um, but to be totally transparent, I got there and I quickly realized like that was not the dream job. And
mm,
I, went from having only known what it was like to live somewhere that to work somewhere that you really love, to then working in an environment that I didn't love. And it wasn't anything about the magazine itself, but it was just like it was a very different environment. It was a weekly magazine, so the pace was just like really high stakes. It was a bit more kind of tabloid leaning,
yeah.
and it was, you're essentially kind of working in the world of Hollywood gossip. And it just felt like at its core, I realized very quickly, like it just wasn't aligned with me and what I really loved about storytelling. And so I had a time there where I was really struggling and I was really, not the happiest. And during that time I applied for different jobs and tried different things and got rejections and got no's. But eventually I moved on, and it kind of became a lesson to me on like not every job is going to be the dream job, and not every stop along the way is going to be the thing that gets you to the top. So I have many more stories like that, but I'll share, those are the first two that kind of come to mind for me.
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that. And not because we want to highlight necessarily the negative, but I think it's important to share that there are bumps often along the way.
Of course.
And so I think it's really important for people to hear that. And a couple of things came to my mind as you were talking. Right now, there's a lot of folks who might be experiencing some layoffs or some career transitions. And, I've had friends, I've experienced that myself. So I'm curious, what might your words be to the woman who has gone through a layoff recently and kind of is in that pivotal moment, but also doesn't want to lose herself and still wants to like trust that there's an aligned next path for her?
Of course. I mean, I think every person that I know who has gone through that, or anytime I've seen it, throughout my career, I feel like people always end up saying, whether it takes 3 months or 6 months, sometimes a year, sometimes maybe even 5 years, that like it ended up being either the best thing for them or a good thing for them. And it's one of those things where when you go through it in life, it's just like, why me? Why is this happening? And it's very easy, I think, to kind of feel like it's the worst thing in the world. But, they say that rejection can be redirection. And so I think that sometimes when things like that happen, it is kind of, pushing you in a different direction that maybe you didn't even realize you needed to be. And I do think that it's unfortunately, especially, working in media and working in journalism, something that we're seeing more and more. But I think for everyone that I know and for kind of just what I'm seeing, I think right now in the industry, things are changing, and things are changing very rapidly across many, many industries. And so I think that the number one question that I would encourage anyone going through this right now to ask themselves is like, what could this be redirecting me towards that might be even better than where I was before? What, maybe is this pushing me towards learning a new skill or using my passion in a way that I maybe never even thought of before, or, thinking outside the box a little bit about like what a career track means or what being on top means for me. I think that as much as you can try to use that time and use that redirection as an opportunity to kind of reflect and figure out how to turn it from a negative thing into a pivot that just helps you be better. I know it's easier said than done because if you're in it, you're like, it's for you to say, right? But I do think that there is a level of kind of just really looking at the moment and thinking about, okay, this horrible thing happened to me, but how can I flip it on its head and think about it as a way to push me towards something new?
Yeah. I really like what you said of how can I kind of redefine what does
Yeah.
even being on top mean for me? Um, and I wonder what does it mean for you? What does being a woman on top or what does success mean to you? Is it where you're at now? Is there something you're still reaching for? Like what does that look like in your world?
That's another great question, and I think I've realized now the stage that I'm at is that I think what my definition of on top means is evolving. Like, I think that when I first graduated from college, in my mind, a woman on top was being editor in chief of a print magazine. And as we know, magazines are no longer, and it's, being an editor in chief is, not, that has changed, right? And so I think for me now, like, being executive editor of digital at the Today Show, like that's not even something I could have dreamed of, and that does feel like the something that's like on top. But there are other, positions and brands and places. Like there's many definitions I think of what it means to be on top. I think in when it comes to work. I think that I'm at a place now, as we mentioned, I just got married, and so I'm also thinking about things like your personal life and what are my I'm very much I think at that crossroads right now of like, okay, I'm newly married, I love my career. I love my life. What does family look like for me, and what
Mm.
do I want that to look like, and how will I, eventually balance that as someone who is very career focused and is, someone who always strives to be a woman on top, and how could that potentially change? So, I think that my definition is always evolving, but I will say that I think one thing that will never change is that I am someone who's ambitious. And I think that for me, ultimately, being a woman on top, what that title or
Mm.
job or placement means might change. But I do think that ultimately, I'm always going to be someone who is just hungry and like wants to, go after what's next and go after what might be, the next rung up. So, it's just I don't know if it's I'm a Leo or it's just like, how it was born, but it's definitely I think something that even if the definition changes, well, something that will always be innate in me for sure.
I appreciate that though, because I think so many women, especially if they listen to a podcast like this, are also ambitious. But what
Yeah.
you said is so powerful in that you get to redefine it all the time. And that I think it gets to be this kind of ongoing process of what does success mean in this season, in this era of life. And sometimes I think we get a little too hooked into a title, even if we don't realize it, like, oh gosh, it has to be this or it has to be these things. And so I think you just gave a permission slip to women listening that it gets to maybe look different and you get to question that,
Yeah.
which I really love.
I think it's something to define for yourself personally. And sometimes it's not even about a title. Maybe for you, it's a salary, or maybe it's a goal. Like for me, being on top is having my own business, even if I only make X amount of money a year. Or maybe for me, being on top is I no longer want to work for a corporation and I just want to be freelance and have flexibility. Like I think on top can mean something different to everybody. It's just about what that means for you to feel like a woman on top.
Yeah. I like that. And there's kind of this sense of ownership that I hear in what you're saying too, of like you kind of have to own what's real for you and
Yep.
get clear with that.
For sure.
Um, I wonder, you have, like you just said, you're so ambitious. You've worked with some of these amazingly powerful media ecosystems and you've been, in the limelight a bit too. I wonder what has that ambition ever kind of cost you, or maybe cost you isn't the right word, but like what is kind of that behind the scenes lens that maybe people don't always realize exists in a role like yours?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that, jobs like mine, right, can look very glamorous. So it's like, look, she's on TV. Look, she's doing a podcast interview. Look, she's posting this, really cool event that she just went to. But the reality is, I think I think any woman who would consider themselves a woman on top, probably anyone who's been on your podcast or anyone who is, in a position of power at any type of job or owns their own business. I mean, 90% 50% of the job is always going to be hustling, right? And it's always going to be grinding. And, a lot of my day is like running between meeting to meeting, getting things in between, you know, I'm constantly on emails. I am, working not necessarily like very set hours. I'm on very early. I'm working late. There's just a lot of juggling. I think multitasking and a sense of always kind of being on, and that's just like the reality of being in a position like mine. And it's something that even if it is busy and it can sometimes be a grind, it is something that I thrive on, right? But I do think that we tend to, especially in the social media era, like you're usually only seeing the highlights and in the glossiest, most glamorous things. But I've had so many ways that it's impacted me. And again, as I mentioned, like I recently got married and I'm in a life stage now, towards my late 30s, and I have a lot of friends who are already like, have kids of a certain age and got married way before I did, and we're in different life phases. And it's very easy as a woman to play the comparison game. And for me, it's like, I maybe prioritize work at certain points in my life over personal things in my personal life. And
Yeah.
I think that there are often going to be, decisions that you have to make where one thing is going to be more important than the other. Sometimes one thing is going to have to take priority over the other in your own life. And so I think, for to your point of just like the behind the scenes lens, I think that's something that's been really very real for me and something that I've had to kind of come to peace with, and isn't always easy. But when you are somebody that is very much um really wanting certain things at work, it's like you can only be in so many places at once, right? And so it's like I know a lot of moms who say that they have to get to a point in their career where maybe like work didn't necessarily take a back seat, but they have to pull back a bit
Yeah.
from work in a different way than they previously did, right? So it's like one thing is always going to have to be sacrificed. And of course, this is more so for women. I think that,
Mhm.
but, I think for me there, those late nights and that grind and the hard work, it definitely takes its toll at times. But for me, I have no doubt that it's worth it. But everybody has their own different journey.
Yeah. I like what you said. I'm curious. This is kind of a selfish question, but does it ever scare you? Because it scares me. So that's why I'm asking. Does it ever scare you to think about pulling back from work, thinking about like pulling back from some of those career elements? Does that ever
Oh, of
freak you
course.
out?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. It definitely does. But I think that, um, I think that like there is going to have to come a time for me, for anyone, I think, and even if it's like for a short amount of time, or if it's a long amount of time, or maybe it never will, who knows? But I think that like there are times in life, no matter what you're going through personally, where I think that it's like, having to really figure out like how important work is, right? Because they say at the end of the day, like a job is a job, but it's not your full life. And one of the things I think a lot about is like, I don't want to be, on my deathbed one day and looking back and just like, wow, all that time that I was focused on work and I didn't think about XYZ other things. And so I think it's important to keep that in perspective. But on the flip side, I also think that if your job or your company or your whatever it is that, you do for a living is also something that brings you joy, or also something that you're lucky enough to be able to combine making a living with a passion, then you shouldn't apologize for leaning into that and for feeling like, you know what, maybe I don't want to pull back on this because I just love it that much.
Yeah. What is it that brings you the most joy about what you do right now?
I think it's connecting with people, and I think that I get to do that in a
Mm.
lot of different ways. I think that, when I was, starting out more and I was a writer, and I was really full-time, just a writer, whether I was writing for the magazine or I was writing for online, it was this idea that like I'm channeling a message or something that I want to say or a story that I want out in the world. And like, hundreds, maybe thousands of people are going to read this story. And that idea of just like getting to connect with people was really incredible and was always something that I think really like filled me up. And then, now being in a position where, I get to be on TV and getting to connect with people from, in their living rooms when I'm on the Today Show, like that's
Yeah.
really cool. Or, now as a manager, I lead a team. I lead a team of nearly 50 people here, on Today Digital.
Wow.
And so connecting with my team and like really realizing that I, as the boss, get to kind of be the one that's filling them up and inspiring them to then go and connect with other people. I think that when I really pull back and think about it is one of the things that just like really just gets me going.
Yeah. You're in the right place, I feel like, for where you need to be.
For sure, for sure.
Did you always kind of see yourself on TV, like, in a way where you were reaching
No.
so many? Okay.
Definitely not.
No.
Yeah, I didn't, it's funny because when I was younger, I think some of my family would say like, "Oh," because I knew probably from high school on that I wanted to be in journalism. I was a bookworm as a kid. I've always known that I wanted to be in storytelling of some kind, and so eventually I settled before college on journalism, and I remember my parents being like, "Oh, what about broadcast?" And I was like, "I could never do that. I would never be on camera. I'm too shy." And so I think that I think it's one of those things where it's like your parents say it, so you're like, "Oh, of course my parents are gonna say that." Every parent loves their kid and thinks their kid should be on TV, right? But I think that where it really became more of a reality when I was at Refinery 29 at that time, for anyone listening who doesn't know, it still is, but when I was there, it was like kind of at its peak as a brand for millennial women. And at that time, we were doing a lot of like red carpets and live streams and like really fun videos. And there were a few folks there who literally had just like seen me around the office and they were like, "Hey, would you be interested? Like, you write a lot about pop culture, you write a lot about culture. Would you be interested in like, doing some interviews for our live streams?" And I kind of was like, "Sure, like, I'll try it out." And I loved it and it was super fun. And I feel like me and some of the other hosts, I did like a weekly Friday afternoon pop culture show. I ended up doing the red carpet at the Grammys and like, I got to really kind of meld my love of like celebrities, storytelling, pop culture with also like just having fun. And I think that the difference there was I always thought that in order to be on TV or to be in broadcast, you had to be this like very
Yeah.
buttoned up like journalism personality. And I think one of the things that worked in my favor was kind of entering the world more in the kind of internety space. I learned that like you can be your authentic self. You can have some fun. And that was something that like Refinery 29 really encouraged. And so that was where I really got a lot of on-camera experience. When I went to Oprah after that to run digital there, I did some kind of talking head appearances and stuff like that on behalf of the magazine, and that was really fun. And then here at Today, it kind of just happened organically where one of the big parts of my job since starting here was figuring out like, okay, we on digital do a lot of coverage of what the show does, but we want to also have that be a bit more in reverse. So the website and social, we do so much original content. How do we get more of that content on the show? So, my boss and I were talking about it at one point, and she was just like, "Oh, I think you've done some on camera stuff before. What if we have you on to be the person to kind of like show the broadcast audience a bit of what Today is doing in the digital landscape?" And that was how it started. And it's been really fun, and it's a perk of the job for sure.
Yeah, I love that it was not the end game. Like, it was not the end goal.
Oh.
And it just
Probably the thing I would say if you had said like 20 years ago, Ariana, what would surprise her? If I told her that I was like, on TV every other week, she'd be like, "No way."
I think that that's great though, because I feel like, at least from my view, what I'm feeling is that you would do this work regardless of kind of you being successful in the sense of being on TV and having these titles and doing these big events. I mean, I think you would always aspire to those, but it seems as though you would do like this is your love language regardless.
Very accurate. Yeah, when you put it like that, I definitely think that I think regardless of like, the fun perks and the TV and all of that, like I think even if I was, just if I had the same title I had 10 years ago and I was a writer and I was getting to just like, write really important stories and like I would be just as happy. And so I think that it definitely, is fun though getting to like chit chat on morning TV with Al Roker, right? So
Yeah, absolutely. Even though he butchered your name when he said it. Your new name.
everyone's used to me as Ariana
No,
Davis.
I
I'm
know.
used to it. So yeah.
It was a very human moment. It was cute. But
Totally.
speaking of these people that you get to interact with, you've had obviously interactions with people like Oprah, Hillary Clinton, all kinds of big names. And so I'm curious what, sitting across that level of woman, is there something that has helped change your ambition or power or even like how you see yourself?
Mm, that's a great question. I think for me, um, from Oprah specifically, and also I would say, I started out my career as Gayle King's assistant. So, Oprah's bestie, yes, but also she's editor at large of Oprah Magazine. She's also an award winning anchor. She, hosts CBS Mornings. And so being Gail's assistant, I think I really learned about like I think from being her assistant, working with her so closely, having the privilege of getting to call her, a mentor and then also working for Oprah, working under her brand. I think from both of them, I really learned you can be somebody who is kind and who is thoughtful and who remembers the names of everybody who works in security in your building and, never forgets to say hello to somebody and is always on time and all of these things. But you can still be a boss and you can still be direct and you can still ask for what you want and you can also be straightforward when something's not working in the workplace, and those can go hand in hand. And I think that like coming up in the, Devil Wears Prada world, right? It's like you see like a Miranda Priestley and you're like, "Oh, most powerful women must be, really not nice," or, I feel like they have to be a certain way in order to become a woman on top or to, reach a certain level. And I feel like, a lot of people always ask me, "What's it like working with Oprah? What's it like working with Gail?" And I'm like, they both of those women are exactly how you see them on TV. They are authentic and kind and curious and thoughtful and just completely themselves. But they're also bosses and they also get it done. And they're also both, to our point earlier, like Gail King, I don't know if that lady sleeps. She, is out and about in the town. She's got 2 jobs at CBS and Oprah. She sometimes does radio. Like, I mean, she is somebody who grinds and she's got 2 kids that she adores. She's also now a grandmother. I mean, she's doing all the things. And so I feel like I've learned a lot from working with her and also, just in the Oprah world on the fact that like it is all possible and you can also be successful and become a woman on top and be somebody who is, really about their business, but also be someone who's just kind and thoughtful and really a joy to work with.
I'm so glad that you shared that because I think I've had that narrative in my head for sure that the higher you climb, the more that you have to be kind of this cold, like, persona.
Yeah.
And I love that you shared, like, yes, there's obviously that boss. You have to have that mindset and kind of be that person, but you also can be warm and can be thoughtful and curious. Um, I am curious though, because they are such bosses. Have you taken away anything as far as like time management and how they structure their day so that they can do all of the things?
Ooh, I mean, I don't I think Gail's just superhuman, so I don't know if she's the
Yeah.
best. She literally doesn't sleep. But I do think that, like, one of the things I will say, I'm not a mom yet, but I think that, like, one of the things Gail is so great about, and Oprah talks about this often, is Gail is when it comes to her kids, when it comes to her family, if her kids call her, like, I remember being her assistant, like, if one of her kids called her or needed her, or even if it was something small, she will drop whatever she's doing, and she's just like,
Wow.
she's gonna like this, this that her kids were always gonna take priority no matter what. And obviously her kids are grown, but regardless, even to this day, like I think that that's something that was always kind of a non-negotiable for her. And so I think that that's something that I've learned is that sometimes no matter what is happening at work, whether it's my husband or my family or, my dog Leo, like there may be times where sometimes it's just like you just have to drop everything to like really give your focus onto what really matters. And at the end of the day, the world isn't gonna crumble at work, like, we're gonna be able to figure it out. There's always a solution, there's always somebody else who can help out and pitch in and all the things. So, I think that sometimes that, like, tendency we have to be like, "Oh my god, if I step away for a minute or if I'm not reachable," or we think that, like, the world is gonna collapse, but I think that working with both of them, I realized and learned firsthand that, like, that's not always the case.
Mm,
It
what
doesn't
a good,
have to be.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's a really good lesson, I think, because at least I run into so many women who carry a lot and kind of carry it all and sometimes feel like if they can't drop one thing, like it's all on their shoulders.
right.
And I love that that's the message that you're taking away is that sometimes those things that are really priorities get to be the priority and you have to let them take up space.
Exactly.
Yeah. Um, I feel like so many women I talk to want more in one way, shape, or another. And I'm wondering what advice you would have to the woman who's like, gosh, I would love to be in your shoes, Ariana, or I would love to be Oprah one day, right? Like there's so many girls or women who want to be Oprah at some point. What would you say to her about, having some of those ambitions, wanting to reach more people? Like what would your advice be there?
I think that it's very easy to get to fall into that trap, right? I think
Yeah.
especially as we talked about with social media, like I said, it's like I think that a trap I've fallen into is, for instance, there was a point in my career where like I just felt like every day I was logging onto Instagram and somebody was announcing their engagement or their baby or their second baby or whatever, and I started to really feel behind or feel like, oh,
Yep.
man, why don't I have those things and I want that and I want more. And then I would literally just have moments sometimes where I was like, wait, do I actually want that? Like, do I
Well,
actually want to be engaged right now? Do I actually want to have a baby? Do I actually? And what I would really actually like take that beat to ask myself, like I would feel myself almost feeling this panic or feeling like this, like, I want that. I want more. I want like, and when I would really actually stop and think about it, it was like, I actually don't think that that's what I want, but it's almost just like, I think society pressure and just seeing some things and seeing these perfectly beautiful curated lives was almost feeding me subconsciously this message of like, I did want those things. And so I think
mhm.
that sometimes I think it is very easy for us to get caught in like, oh my God, I want that person's career, or I want that person's stage, or I want, you know, exactly what I'm seeing that this person has. But I think it is really important to just sit with yourself and really reflect on what you actually really deeply want and thinking about, okay, I do eventually want to be, this position or this title or this things, but like, do I really need to be racing towards this right now? Do I actually want this, or do I think I want it because I saw this on somebody's TikTok and it looks really cool? So I think that self reflection is really important. And I think also just being patient. I think we also sometimes forget that, like, God willing, everybody, hopefully will have, decades to work and to move their way up the ladder and to do different things. But I think we put this pressure on ourselves of like, oh my God, this person's in this role right now under, she did it before 40. Like, and I can't believe I haven't done it yet. And that puts that extra pressure on us. But there's no rush. Like, where are you going? It's, if it takes you a couple extra years than the other person, does that really matter in the long run? So I think I would say just like, stopping and thinking about like, okay, what is really the rush? And is the rush really about something that you deeply want, or is it about what you think that you should want based off of what other people have?
Mm. That's so good. What's the rush? And sometimes to kind of go with that, I was thinking about this around capacity because I've heard sometimes like, gosh, do you even have for example, podcasts, like, do you even have the capacity to have millions of downloads right now? Or are you still in that growing stage, right? Like, and so I think that translates to life in general of just like, well, gosh, even if you were granted the wish right now, do you have all the lessons that you need to have to be in that place to hold the space to do the thing that you think you want to do, and that kind of was coming up as you were saying that as well.
I love that. Yes. Asking yourself, what's the rush and do you even have the capacity if if you did reach that finish line, then what?
Yeah, you have just kind of accelerated in your career like we've talked about. I wonder if there are any tips or things that you can tactically give to women if they are in a place where they're in a growth season. Like, I really want to grow. What are some things that you can say, gosh, go get yourself a mentor or go do XYZ? What are some of those tips?
Mm. I definitely I think for me, I think sometimes we almost forget that I think there's just so much knowledge that's so quickly available at our fingertips. Like, I'm a really big proponent of, I listen to a lot of podcasts and I feel like I get so much really great advice and insights, but also like, depending on what your niche is or what it is you're trying to do, right? Like for me, I listen to a lot of podcasts about like media and writing and, also, women on top type, anything that I feel like is going to kind of feed me, even if it's like in passing on my commute home. I'm a really big proponent of that, and also YouTube. Like, I think we just take for granted that there's so much, so many great tools that are available to us. Just literally, if you just take the time to, I think, research and feed yourself that kind of content, it's out there. I think it's just like, we automatically think like, oh, how will I figure out how to do X, Y, Z? And you might be surprised that there's literally hundreds of women or men who have spoken about this, and there's a YouTube video about this exact topic that you're looking for. So I think sometimes it's almost simplifying and just starting there. I think that that's a great place. I also think that on the flip side of that though, one of the things I think that we don't do enough of these days, and I know this sounds cliche, but I think unplugging is so important because for me, some of my best ideas, whether it's a strategy for work, whether it's, ideas for a job interview, whether it's, plotting something for my next book, like whatever it is, a lot of those ideas come to me when I leave my phone at home and go for a long walk with my dog, or I'm taking a long shower and I'm like literally actually unplugged. And I think that because we're just so tapped into social media, I'm on Slack all day at work and emails all day. And then when I'm not doing those things, I'm usually binge watching, something on TV. And so I think when we actually give our brains the space that they need in order to think about like you want to grow, okay, but like maybe if you quiet your mind and actually give yourself some time alone with yourself to really think about what that means and what that could look like, I feel like that's sometimes when the best inspiration and the best ideas can really come when you reach a place where you can actually get into like some flow a little bit.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you touched on that because it is harder than it sounds. Like, we all talk about this idea of
Right.
unplugging, like, we know it's good for us,
Yeah.
but we don't actually put it into practice very well, and
And I'm not even talking about meditating, right? Like I am working on meditating. It's a thing that I'm, working on, but it's hard, right? Because your mind's racing, you're going through the to-do list, but not even meditating. I'm talking about like just when was the last time you went for a walk and didn't have your phone out and you weren't texting or voice memoing or listening to a podcast or multitasking? And I have to like consciously tell myself to do that because I feel like I'm
yeah,
always trying to cram in as much as I can into one day. But literally just going for a walk with my dog and actually being like, oh wow, look at the trees. Look at the beautiful skyline. Look at this over here. Like it's just I think having that break, even if it's just 10-15 minutes, sometimes I think that's when I really get the most clarity and I really understand like, I'm like, "Oh, this," all of a sudden in my mind, I'm like, "You know what? I haven't talked to so and so at work in a while and maybe it would be a good idea to talk to them and see if they have any ideas for XYZ new," so I think just giving yourself the brain space in this like time when we're just all so tapped in is really, really important.
yeah, I agree with you, and that is always when you get the best ideas is, those
Mhm.
random moments where you're just driving in the car or, like you said, you're on a walk or in the shower, like, these things come to you because you've created that space for your brain to actually flow in a different way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't get to drive it. I'm a New Yorker, but when I do, one of the things I love is that my parents and my family live in Maryland, and one of my favorite things is like a couple times a year driving to Maryland because I don't get to drive that often. And so for me, it's like being in a car, I'm literally not looking at my phone. I'm just driving. Sometimes I'll even just drive with no music on, which sounds a little crazy, but like it's literally just being on the road and driving and not being on my phone and just thinking. And I think it sounds like such a small thing, but it definitely can, I think, really feed you, especially if you're in a space of growth and you're looking for something new or you're looking for like ideas or you're trying to like feel more inspired. I think that that's really important.
Yeah. Yeah, I resonate with the driving, and I have occasionally just turned the music off, so I don't think you're crazy for doing that. Sometimes it's like, I just have to listen to nothing right now.
Just be quiet. Quiet is great
Just
sometimes. There's nothing wrong with quiet.
I am interested in, you've mentioned how media is changing and that you're seeing a lot shift with AI coming into the picture, with our attention spans, differently focused on things. What are some of those changes that you are seeing, and what do you think the future is kind of shifting towards?
Yes, I think I listened to Emma Grady. I know
Mhm.
she's a popular person right now, and there's a lot of conversation about her as kind of a role model when it comes to women in the workplace. But one of the things that she said, I think, in a podcast a while back that has really stuck with me is as a journalist and a writer and a creative, I think that for a very long time, I will admit AI scared me. I think that, it's one of those things where we feel like AI is going to take my job, AI is going to ruin my brain. How could we rely on AI and ChatGPT and Claude and all these things for like it felt like it went against my like moral code also as a writer. Like it was just very scary. And I remember one of the things she said was like, we can't be afraid of AI. We have to like figure out how to use it to our advantage. And so I think that it was something along those lines. And that shifted things for me a little bit because I think that like for me as a team leader, the old me would have been like, there's no way I'm going to encourage my team to use AI, or, there's no way that there's ever going to be a world where anyone in journalism would ever use AI. And the reality is things are shifting. And so now it's more about, I think, thinking about how to use AI responsibly as a tool to be helpful, to be more efficient, to be, um, you know, use it as a way to inform and to kind of bolster your work no matter what you're doing, whatever industry it is, but particularly I think in media. So it can work towards things like optimizing and SEO and, helping with data. But at the end of the day, you're always going to need humans to truly be real writers, and you're going to need humans to truly fact check. And I think that we've seen that, especially in the last 5 to 10 years in media, whether it's in politics or whether it's in just general, even sometimes with pop culture. I mean, there's endless cases of times that something has been reported by AI or people see something on YouTube and they're like, oh, that must be true because I saw it on YouTube, or oh,
Yeah.
this thing must be true because I saw a TikTok about it. And the reality is like we need journalists and we need humans to really be behind the dissemination of information because if not, you're just going to have artificial intelligence telling you what to think and what to do and what to read. And that could end very scarily. So that does still scare me. But
Yeah.
I think that there are ways to use AI in a way as a tool almost to be smart and to do it responsibly, but without being like, all right, well, I'm just gonna have AI write the story for me because I'm lazy, or it's just gonna write this headline, or it's just gonna tell me what to do because, you know, I think our gift as writers and editors and journalists is that we are bringing, the essence of ourselves and our training and our skills to the table, and
Mhm.
that's always important.
Do you use it as like a partner when you are writing, as a creative kind of thought partner, or do you just
I don't, but I
Yeah.
think that I'm seeing and hearing people do it more, and I'm a little bit less judgy, I guess, about it because it's like, I think that the world is moving in that direction, and I think for me personally, I really am trying to be careful about even protecting my own creative space, and like I notice sometimes, like I think that the most I ever used ChatGPT was during wedding planning, and like that's a great example of like wedding planning with like helping to alphabetize, my seating chart or, comparing like different budgets and like quotes that I got from different vendors. Like for that kind of thing, it was so helpful. But one thing I noticed was like the more that I started to use it for certain things during wedding planning, the more my brain got used to it. And then it was
Mm,
like I found myself instead of like checking with myself and being like, okay, what do I think between this vendor or this vendor? I'd be like, oh, maybe I'll just ask Chat GPT. And then I was like, whoa. Okay,
yeah.
so for me, I think I try to be tapped into myself and self-aware enough to know, like, there are times when it can be used as a tool, but I think when it comes to creativity and, just, like, how my brain works as, like, a storyteller and a writer, I wanna really protect that, like, essence of me that I think makes me a writer and makes me a creative, but who knows? Talk to me in 20 years and maybe I'll doesn't really matter because everyone's using AI anyway, so
I think that is great though, because it helps make it more sacred. And you can always tell, at least I'm starting to get a much better filter on the writing that's done with AI versus the writing that's done by a human. And it sounds different. It looks different. It reads different. I would guess that it would start to shift a little bit more where we actually crave the human connection from all levels now that we have AI. And I like that you said, like, it's not truthful. And it's not always truthful. And I hope that almost as a result that we end up getting more self-aware. Hopefully it forces people to get a little more tuned in with themselves so that they're not relying on AI so much, to your point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
of course, yeah.
I know that your book with Frida, she kind of was like living unapologetically and in her identity and really was kind of sometimes it was controversial, sometimes it was messy. And I'm curious for you, where are you still kind of learning to be more unapologetic in your own life?
Ooh, that is a good one. I think that when it comes to what we were talking about like leaning into being a boss and being into a leader, and I think that like I think in the workspace, I think for women especially, always I think there's a push pull between wanting to be liked and wanting to be somebody who gets along with everybody, and there's always that push pull between that and also just being able to be direct and being able to say like this is how things are going to be. And I think that that's something that I'm always, pushing myself for because I am a people pleaser and I'm not, like I said, I feel like I learned by example from other women, how to not necessarily be a Miranda Priestley. And I don't think I ever want to be like that. But sometimes you got to have a little dose of Miranda Priestley in order to, get things done and make sure that you're being respected and to also make sure that, um, you're pushing your team or your company or whatever it is forward. And so I think that that is something that I'm always going to be, taking a little dose of that Frida boldness that I write about in the book and really thinking about like sometimes you just have to really be fearless when it comes to those things and remember that like what's the worst that can happen? Someone's going to think that you're direct, but like that's okay.
Yeah, that you're too much. I think that's a big fear, often from
Yes.
women is like, I don't want to be perceived as too much.
Right.
Um,
But like if you are, who the heck cares?
yeah.
There's nothing wrong with being a little too much sometimes. Maybe you don't wanna be too much all the time, but I think that sometimes being too much is what's gonna get the job done.
Ooh, that's a good mic drop moment. I feel like if you're listening to this, go
Ooh.
back and like rewind that, go back 30 and like listen to that again a couple times. We have a
Course.
closing tradition on this podcast where I ask the guest that I'm interviewing to leave a quote or reflection or just something that's landing on their heart for the next guest, not knowing who it is. So, what I'd like to do is read what was left for you and then give you the opportunity to do the same thing.
Oh,
Um,
okay, here, let me
so
pull up a quote while you do that. Okay.
Okay. So the quote that was left for you, and it's not necessarily like a quote, but what was left for you is that if there's not room for you at a table, then build your own table. Take the risk, even if it seems scary. And if you are somebody who is in a position where you can give advice or give some of your time, pay it forward because you are helping the next cohort of women achieve their success and their dreams.
Ooh, I
Yeah.
like that one. Good one.
Yeah.
Good
I think
one.
it is what you're doing too. So very apt for this conversation. So I'd love to give you the opportunity to do the same. It doesn't have to be, a specific quote. It can literally just be anything that you'd like to leave for the next guest.
Well, there is this quote that I love. I had to look it up because I always butcher it. But some of the things we were talking about, I think, as far as thinking about like, oh my gosh, I want to be like this person, or I want to grow, or I feel behind, or I think that it's very easy to get caught up in that way of thinking. But I think when it comes to writing and like thinking about like, oh, I haven't written my next book, or I think about other authors and their journeys and like wanting to be like them, and I think it can get easy to get caught up in the comparison game. But there's this quote by Martha Graham. She's a choreographer that I love. And the quote is, there is a vitality, a life force, an energy, a quickening that is translated through you into action. And because there is only one of you in all time, this expression is unique. And I think that that quote really sticks with me when it comes to writing or when it comes to like my journey, because it's just like, there's only one you of all time, and I think when you really sit back and think about that, like, it just really makes me focus on me and stop like, I'm like, "Okay, I don't wanna write like this person, I don't wanna sound like this person, I don't wanna, like, model my career off of this person," because at the end of the day, there's only one Ariana, just like there's only one Valerie,
Yeah.
there's only one you of it that will ever exist, and so I think just remembering that you have this journey and you're the only one who's ever gonna live this journey and doing it in your own way is so important, so that's my little quote that I
Mm,
will share.
I love that. You could just like feel the weight of that in a good way, in the best way. And I feel like it makes me want to be too much. Like what
Be
we
too
were
much. Exactly. Be too much. That's the motto of this podcast.
It does. It makes me want to take up space differently and value my life in a different way. And so, thank you so much for leaving that. Thank you so much, Ariana, for your leadership, for your voice, for your just advocating for women and continuing to be such a light. I so appreciate this conversation and I'm excited to see what it is that you do next. So, truly, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having this. Such a lovely conversation. Thank you for your thoughtful questions. It was great meeting you.
Yeah. Thank you for tuning into the show today. And before you go, I just have one quick favor to ask of you. There is a really simple way that you can help support me and help support this show, and that is to hit that follow button on whatever app you're listening to the show on. I'm trying really hard to level up the content and deliver unique value and amazing guests, and just hitting that follow button is the magic that will help continue to empower that. And remember that the world deserves to hear your voice and your stories, and you deserve a place at the top.